Each man's work will become evident, for the day will show it, because it is to be revealed with fire. And the fire itself will test the quality of each man's work. But if any man's work which he has built on remains, he will receive a reward. If any man's work is burned up, he will suffer loss, but he himself will be saved, yet as though through fire. And then he asked this, he asked this question rhetorically. Do you not know that you are the temple? Or it says, actually, you are a temple. And by the way, when he says this, he's speaking to everybody. It says you in English. We don't have a way to say you in the plural. We do in Texas. It's called y'all, right? And if you go to New York, it's yous guys, right? There's a way to say it there, right? But if Paul could say this in text, and he'd say, don't y'all know that you are the temple? If he's in New York, he'd say, don't you guys know that you are the temple? Yeah, don't you know that you are the temple of God and the Spirit of God dwells in y'all? I want to emphasize the plurality of this here, because again, the English doesn't really capture it. If any man destroys the temple of God, God will destroy him, for the temple of God is holy, and that is what y'all are. Let no man deceive himself, let no woman deceive herself. If any person among you thinks that they are wise in this age, now Paul goes back to this argument of wisdom, and he really raised this question in chapter 2 of 1 Corinthians of the wisdom of God, and again, he places this in the context of the cross. And that's important. Again, the cross, our focus. And then he's talked about this issue of factionalism, and then he comes back to this point. In fact, this is a rabbinic form of teaching. You go from a general principle to a very specific principle that defines some things back to a general principle. And of course, that very specific principle is supposed to be applied to the entirety of what's being taught here. Paul's looping back to chapter 2 of 1 Corinthians. He says, let no one deceive himself. If anyone of you thinks that they are wise in this age, let them become foolish so that they may become wise. Let them become foolish. We should all be fools for Messiah's sake, right? For the wisdom of this world is foolishness before God, for it is written, He is the one who catches the wise in their craftiness, taken from Job, and then again in Psalm 94, that they are that the wise, that the Lord knows the reasonings or the thoughts of the wise, that they are useless. So then let no one boast in men, and this is the issue. And Paul wants to make sure that we get this straight. And then he uses this phrase that I think is a catchphrase slogan in Corinth that's used. They were very liberal in Corinth, and hey, I can do anything I want, and I have everything I want. But he says this in verse 21, says, let no one boast in men, for all things belong to you. It's kind of interesting, right? And this is a point that Shaul is going to make, that look, in Messiah Yeshua, what do you not already have that you didn't receive? It's the question he's going to ask in chapter 4. In other words, they're bickering and they're striving after one another, and they're jealous of one another, and they're hateful to one another. But Paul says, look, you've got everything. Why is that your heart, and why is that your attitude? For all things belong to you, whether of Paul or Apollos or Cephas, Peter, or the world or life or death, things present or things to come. All things belong to you, and you belong to Messiah, and Messiah belongs to God. Now, keep in mind, Rav Shaul makes a distinction between Messiah and God sometimes in this terminology, and some have said, well, if Messiah is God, then how can he not be called God? How come he belongs to God? Well, we have to keep in mind that Paul does make a distinction between the earthly Yeshua and, God the Father in heaven. And, of course, we have to ask the question, does he ever describe Messiah with divine qualities? Does he ever describe him in a divine fashion and way? And the answer to that is yes. I don't think we need to look at this. We can balance this out with other texts to point to the divinity and the deity of Yeshua. That's not really something that Paul's making a point here. But his point here is the issue of the Corinthians and what their priority and their focus is.